Welcome back to Ed's Not Dead. I'm Robbie Dodd. I'm joined by my co-hosts, Mr. C.H. Siddons.
Hello.
What's up, KC?
Nothing.
And Mr. Peter Crable.
Oh, hello and welcome.
We are back. Season 4, this is episode 2. We hope you joined us for our first episode. You can still find it on the interweb. It was a good one, except for one segment that in the show notes it said Robbie's section was lame. So skip that segment of the first episode. But
I thought it was pretty cool.
It's good to have you back, folks. As always, you can find us on Twitter at Ed's Not Dead PC. Check out the website, edsnotdead.com. Mr. Crable recently revealed that one of Mr. Siddons' blogs had quite a bit of traffic, right?
Yeah, equity sticks are not enough. Just it seems to be a winner. Just people keep going back to it. So we will tweet that out on a very regular basis every day at 3:15. We're going to tweet that article out.
Just call me the well.
Yeah.
Who would have thought that equity sticks are not enough would become such a it would just catch on fire.
A cultural phenomenon.
I'm preying on the inadequacies, the self-realized inadequacies of teachers.
And the funny thing is, several of those blog posts have been turned and published by actual reputable large publications. And this one though is the one that struck the chord.
Yeah. Well,
meanwhile, I keep getting John Deere letters from Edutopia. Whatever.
John Deere?
Yeah, I don't really know what a John Deere letter is, but it's like when they deny me.
Oh, so they've been. Have you sent them equity sticks or not enough?
I don't know if I have. I've sent a bunch, and I'm a little discouraged.
Edutopia seems to be a tough nut to crack. I've sent I don't know how many, maybe a couple, maybe like two or three, but no bites.
And they won't even give you any reason. And I've emailed them back. Can you tell me why? Nothing.
Surely none of my posts have been picked up by any of those.
No,
outfits you're talking about.
You're too big time for Edutopia.
No, I think it's because I've never published one.
I wasn't going to say that, but now you have.
All right. Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Pulp Education, a full-service educational media company specializing in leadership, instruction, and 21st century school reform. Other than the show feedback on the Lame Robbie segment last episode, what else do you have for us, Mr. Siddons?
Well, a regular listener and a former colleague of mine, Margaret, she said, you know what? I love the show last week, especially the discussion about college kids. And she continued by saying, having two of my own, I would vehemently disagree with the author. My kids are my heroes for navigating a fishbowl life. They have proven to be more resilient and focused during this period than most full-grown adults. The thing I love most about Generation Z is their willingness to be vulnerable and reach out when they need help. And yes, they even form relationships with some of their professors because they are people as well. Thanks for a great show.
Margaret is such a loyal friend of the pod.
She is. She very much is. And I think she's listened to just about every episode. And when we see each other in person, she always tells me what she thinks. And I'm so glad to get that feedback from her. So thank you, Margaret.
Thank you, Margaret.
Did we text with each other about something? Somebody said that they really liked how we said empathy is not to be confused with weakness.
I didn't get that text.
Okay, somebody sent that to me. I don't remember who.
But it is.
It is to be confused with weakness? Oh, okay.
Just kidding.
Sorry,
I'm glad Margaret
whoever
didn't
told
take
me
any
that.
I'm glad Margaret didn't take any shots at me about my stance on that curmudgeon-y, grouchy professor that wrote the article. I tried to defend him kind of tepidly, right?
We needed somebody to defend him.
Yeah.
Talking about the bridge over troubled water, bridge over River Kwai, whatever it was.
All right, we have a great show tonight. We are really excited to have Dr. Diana D'Amico-Polowitz on the show. She wrote a very interesting book called Blaming Teachers. Mr. Siddons was able to score her as a guest on Ed's Not Dead, so we're psyched to interview her. There's a lot to unpack there with blaming teachers, so we got to we gotta find out what that's all about. And before we interview Dr. Dmytro Polowicz, we are going to get into a recent op-ed by the one and only Thomas Friedman, titled "After the Pandemic: A Revolution in Education and Work Awaits. Providing more Americans with portable health care, portable pensions, and opportunities for lifelong learning is what politics needs to be about post-November 3." Mr. Craves, you found this. It is from yesterday, October 20th, right?
Indeed it is.
Admittedly, I had a little bit of a hard time following his reasoning, which I do sometimes. I felt like maybe I was rereading The World is Flat, which is now circa 2005, like 15 years old, but there were some of the same kinds of themes in this. So I'll read you a couple quotes, fellas, and then I want to get your reaction about some of his assertions. So first, the reason the post-pandemic era will be so destructive and creative is that never have more people had access to so many cheap tools of innovation. Never have more people had access to high-powered, inexpensive computing. So he argues that the half-life of skills is steadily shrinking. That's very Friedman-ish right there. And so then he applies it to the world of ed. Your children can expect to change jobs and professions multiple times in their lifetimes, which means their career path will no longer follow a simple, quote, learn to work trajectory. He quotes Heather McGowan, co-author of The Adaptation Advantage, who likes to say, but rather a work, learn type trajectory. So the impact on education, Friedman says we've started hiring many people. I know Casey's eyes are going to start to cross, with no degrees. If you know stuff and can demonstrate that you know stuff and have been upskilling yourself, I need to do that with online training to do the task that we need, you're hired. We think this is a structural shift. And finally, he argues in the future, post-secondary education will be a hybrid ecosystem of company platforms, colleges, and local schools whose goal will be to create the opportunity for lifelong radical reskilling. So what I'm gathering is, again, he's kind of making a flattening argument, and also an argument that things are going to become so decentralized because of this access to technology that, correct me if I'm wrong, you all, but this kind of self-directed learning is going to be key to people's professional and economic futures. And that will really shape the world of work and obviously education. So what are your thoughts?
I mean, I think there's some of his points in there, I think it would be hard to argue with. I do think there's probably going to be, and we've already seen, more mechanization of certain jobs, AI and or other type of robots, kind of taking human jobs. One such example would be in car factories, automobile factories. And so kind of like the line auto worker has certainly disappeared and been replaced by the auto computer technician. And I do think that in general, you could see a world where they're basically like companies are outsourcing every job. But to be honest, I think he has his head so far inside the business world, and he is his I don't know if glorified is the right word, venerated so much technology, Silicon Valley, that I just to say that like it's going to change society in so many ways, in the workforce in so many ways, I have a hard time getting there to that next piece. So the world that he kind of paints sort of sounds like a dystopian, tech-fueled, machine-driven world where every worker, you're basically a gig worker going from one job to the next.
Everything's outsourced.
Everything's outsourced by job, not like by occupation, but by job. Like, I need somebody to make this. Boom, there you go. And so from a worker's perspective, like, well, what do you're doing all these skills, but if everybody is upskilling and if everybody is getting these new skills on demand as they come out, which he seems to imply that those that do will be the most successful, well, what about everybody else? And to that point, I think too, that's sort of already how the business world works. Like, so many companies have their core operations and then they outsource things to like 1099 workers on a basis for when they get, whether it's government contracts or private contracts, that to me, it kind of already seems like it works that way. And then that's to say nothing of like all of the other jobs out there that I really don't think this applies to. And I don't know what percentage of the jobs, but to me, we're not even at 50% of jobs or the workforce where this is what he's talking about. So to kind of make this blanket statement of this huge revolution coming, I mean, sort of, but we've kind of already been in it. Yeah, the world is changing, but I'm not sure that we're ever going to end up in this world that he's referring to. I guess the last thing I said, one quote that you did not point out is where they say learning is the new pension. And I just don't think there's ever going to be a time when unions don't exist. I don't think there's ever going to be a time when there aren't some group of people in some occupations that are interested in a steady paycheck and a steady job with steady benefits, and that's fine and that's enough for them. The world that he's painting is like this: go, 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 get a new job, get a new skill, go to this campus. And I think it ignores a lot of the realities of what many people actually want.
And I think you nailed it. Friedman largely thinks in economic principles.
Yeah.
And the economic principle to me that he's thinking about here is efficiency. He's not thinking about quality. And he doesn't really talk about whether this will, produce smarter people or people that have a better lifestyle or more earnings.
It generates more revenue.
Yeah, he's talking about revenue, and he's really talking in terms of still, I think, those that are in management and control that have the ability to outsource that work. Right. I'm not sure what the upside is for the workers themselves that he talks about here. Upskilling, well, that's great. So I can learn to use a new app.
Right.
How does that make for a better life for me?
Well, and think about, and he doesn't explicitly say this, but, I would imagine generally the products coming out and creating the ideas in Silicon Valley, he would point to as good things or useful things, but how does Facebook help society?
Yeah.
It doesn't. And if anything, it hurts society due to the misinformation, the siloing of kind of like friend circles and where you're getting your news sources from. I think it hurts democracy more than anything else. And I think, Twitter, like, is Twitter adding anything to society? No.
Yeah, but it's real life.
He points to Steve Jobs as kind of like, they talk about how you're going to be problem finders. You're going to go out and find a problem and then solve the problem instead of looking for problems to then make a solution. But even Apple, they make a ton of money and they make really cool products, but does it make anybody's life better? I think you'd be a little hard pressed to argue that. To your points, like, to what end, aside from making money, is any of this, like, is the goal of any of this?
And Bill Burr talks about on his podcast, and I know that he's caused some controversy with his comedy, but in his podcast, he talks about, he recently just, the last 2 episodes was talking about back when he was growing up in the 80s, he self-deprecating to the point where he talks about he didn't know how to use a library. He didn't go to the library to find information. So like, it wasn't, he couldn't just go on Google and find anything that he wanted. He said there's a almost like a hierarchy. He talks about it like almost like a hierarchy of people that could get information and have knowledge. And now everybody has that. And I've jokingly referred to folks when they get their first iPhone, and now you're the smartest person in the world. And I'm obviously joking about it, but it's also, people use Facebook to get their news. People use Twitter to find something out, or they use Wikipedia, or they use Google search, and kids do this as well. So I think the democratization of knowledge in that sense has a lot of upsides to it, but we're clearly seeing a lot of the detraction and a lot of the issues that could come with having so much information in front of us.
Well, having been someone that is Bill Burr's age and was taught explicitly how to use the card catalog in a library, which was maybe one of the most useless skills and awful.
I remember that too.
It was awful. And if you couldn't figure out the Dewey Decimal System, you felt like a complete idiot.
Right. And you couldn't find information.
No. So I would say that Google, I mean, I'm biased, but I would take Google over a card catalog any day.
No, I'm not arguing that. I'm not saying that he is either. What he was joking about was that basically now everyone, at some point, people like me and maybe you wouldn't go to the library to find out more information because we didn't know how to use the Dewey Decimal System.
And Bill Burr, he was listening to Van Halen and was probably not all that interested in learning. He wasn't there when they were doing the card catalog teaching.
Right.
I wanted to say though, Crable, to your point, I'm a large consumer of sports media.
Yeah.
And so I go to a site like CBSSportsline.com. I mean, I do lament the days where I could see a writer and click on their story because I could expect a certain level of quality from their reporting, from their perspective. And now I go and I don't know who any of these people are that are writing these articles. And I mean, it's the same thing in higher ed with adjunct professors. I mean, it's already been in the works, and I would again ask, is it better?
I would say
I don't necessarily think it is.
No, and Casey, you had mentioned, and there's this sort of narrative out there that Robbie, you mentioned in the lead up to the segment here, kind of like the access to all these new things, high speed computers, ease of information at the fingertips, but I think that's a little bit overblown and like not necessarily true. So, right, Casey, you said it used to be that, the hierarchy of who could go and get information, who could go to the library or who could do this or who could do that. And I think that it just looks different now. I still think people still put in barriers to include and or exclude people from the party. So, one of the things I thought about as he was talking here was, we have access via Google. You said more knowledge. I would disagree with that. We have more access to more content online. The knowledge is in there within the content, but now we need to know how to filter between valid, invalid sources, look for bias, etc. So just because there is information out there, it doesn't necessarily make it more accessible. In some ways, it's almost, well, I don't know if I'd say that. So I would say it's almost more dangerous. But
I would argue that it's more accessible. I see where you're going. I mean, the Dewey Decimal System or card catalogs didn't tell you whether it was a peer-reviewed thing either. I mean, it didn't necessarily help you with knowing whether it was good or not.
Right.
But let's say we're in 1984 and there's a pandemic and Robbie was a freshman in high school and
I would have been in trouble.
Like the nightly news person is telling you that we need to start wearing masks. I can't help but think that our country would be in a different place. We would not have 250,000 people dead.
Yeah, I agree.
When did Walter Cronkite die?
I know he was rather had taken over by that time. This was
just ask Alexa.
Last episode. I don't want to get into this.
Alexa,
I was going to tell you the
Walter
three
Cronkite died.
Yeah,
the three in 1984. Can you name them for the three networks?
Brokaw, Jennings, Rather.
Vascular disease.
What did we turn that off?
Very good. Yeah.
Did I get it? Did I nail the three? All right, sweet.
You nailed the three.
I was just demonstrating to you my use of technology to get any kind of information that I want.
I do just want to make one last point, and then we may be running up against the end of the segment here. So I'll just give myself the last word.
No, I want to have the last word.
I will give myself the last word.
No, I want to talk about one more thing.
But one thing I don't think, and I don't know whether it has a place in this conversation and in this op-ed, but I do worry about is that his thinking is kind of the ultimate in the cream rises to the top. It's kind of the ultimate in you pull yourself up by your bootstraps. The ultimate in you let your talent do the talking for you, right? And we all know that is not always the case, that there are many talented people out there who are denied access, that are denied opportunities. And so I think that within all of this, one thing that I'm in, as I read this too, I'm like, well, even if all this stuff does happen, and all of it comes to fruition, I still do think about how are we ensuring access for everyone? How are we ensuring that this doesn't just become the old boys network again, which kind of Silicon Valley by all, I don't know, something. What I hear from my sources, it's kind of like that. So that's just something I want to kind of like bring to the conversation, or just, something to chew on as well, is that, okay, how are we still kind of keeping all these other factors in mind?
He said, he basically, and I'll let you go, Casey, but I mean, he's basically talking about the market, that the market's going to make sure this is all, the market's going to dictate this.
Everything.
Right? The invisible hand is going to be at work, and it's going to create this new way of doing business. And go ahead, Casey.
So the one piece that stuck out to me was, and you talked about my eyes crossing when you're talking about it, but the quote from in the middle of the article: "We have started hiring many people with no degrees. If you know stuff and can demonstrate that you know stuff and have been upskilling yourself with online training to do the task that we need, you're hired." Can you bring that into the education world, and what does that look like? I don't know.
It looks like TFA.
It's TFA. You get a crash course in teaching, and how much does the role, what's the role look like for higher education institutions where they're circumvented from that power dynamic? Because right now, post-secondary education institutions hold all the power for our teaching force, and those, you can call them barriers, you can call them hoops. I mean, there's an argument to be had about the value of a post-secondary education, learning sequence with regard to education. Like you talk to most teachers that come out of school, ask them about their classroom management class that they took, from someone who's never been in a middle school classroom ever. I don't mean to. I certainly don't want to.
I know where we're going with this.
I know. You don't know where I'm going with this, because in the past, you could say I certainly would be painting with a very broad brush, but I feel like there certainly is. I think there's some nuance to be had about the value of teaching certificates coming from post-secondary education institutions.
Would you be referring to the professionalization of the teaching force?
I mean, we can.
I just did a segue.
We can talk about that with Dr. Palowitz, certainly.
Except it's called the over-professionalization.
And you brought that up before we got on air, Robbie, and I never really thought about it, but there's a certain amount of hoops and ridiculousness that teachers have to deal with, and I wonder. Maybe it's a discussion for another day, but how much of it is outdated and how much of it is completely useless to a teacher's career?
Well, the only thing I know about it, it has something to do with the Bandurian Triangle.
I love the Bandurian Triangle.
I'm just kidding. It doesn't. It actually has to do with John Mayer, who talked extensively all of these things related to teacher over-professionalization of the teaching profession. You can find some good, interesting theories about it in John Mayer's work on institutionalism. Well, all of these things are connected. All right.
Yeah, and I wonder, the last piece that you got me thinking about was, you can look up enough data about the education level and amount of training that individual teachers get over a period of years, and how that does not correlate to their prestige, their professional level, and certainly their pay. And this particular change that Thomas Friedman is talking about is certainly not going to help.
And you left one factor out: their effectiveness
and student impact. What does that have to do with student impact? Absolutely.
Yeah. All right. And I will tell you this. I'll leave you with this. I'll get the last word, Mr. Crable. If what Friedman is envisioning is anything like what we're doing all day, every day, right now, I'm going to be in North Dakota with our next guest, Dr. Diana D'Amico Polowitz. Folks, don't go away. We're looking forward to interviewing. We'll be right back. All right, fellas, we are incredibly excited to have Dr. Diana D'Amico Polowitz on Ed's Not Dead. Welcome, Dr. D'Amico Polowitz. We're very happy to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
All right, but before we get into the first question, I want to read your bio. So Dr. Polowitz is a historian of education and social policy. She's an assistant professor in the Educational Foundations and Research Program at the University of North Dakota. Dr. Polowitz's research explores school policy as social policy and centers on fundamental questions around equity, race, power, and the role of institutions in creating or disrupting inequality. All right, so let's jump in. In your book, Blaming Teachers, you note how teachers have consistently stood in kind of a state of blame and reform. You note examples that date all the way back from the 1800s. What narratives need to change surrounding our public school educators? And if they do change, how do you envision this change over the next 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, that's a great question, right? Get right to it. It's like a question, right? Yeah. I mean, so what the book shows is that, we've done this historical dance for a long time, right? Like, our schools are super important, value our schools, but then also a sense of, gosh, our schools are failing, right? And so those two things have gone hand in hand. And then to add to that, why? Why are our schools failing? It's the teachers. If only we had better teachers, well, then we'd have better schools, student performance would go up, and you know what? We'd have better society, right? Like economic problems would be solved, international competition would be much higher, all of these things, right? And so in the name of teacher reform through school reform, we see this wave of professionalization policies, right? Trying to make teachers into something else, into better somehow. But what I find in the book is that professionalization, as other fields have experienced it, had almost no bearing on what teachers went through, right? Professionalization reforms is very much about fitting them to this larger growing bureaucracy, right? So it was reform in the name of standardization. So teachers, in the name of all this reform, found themselves with less voice. They found themselves compartmentalized to their classrooms. They found themselves in the bottom of this towering bureaucratic organization. So, I kind of write against the idea that like teachers, you just need to speak up. That would change things, right? What I find in the book and what's obviously happening now is teachers are speaking up. We're just not listening. Right? We're just not listening. There's no space for them at the table, right? No meaningful space for teachers at the table. So I think real change would be structural. Honestly, it would be structural, thinking about the role of teachers as leaders in our schools, as decision makers, and the ways that we defer to teachers. But a lot would have to change to make space for that.
So let me give you an example and tell you if I'm right. Like the bureaucratic labyrinth that you have to navigate with certification or the highly qualified designation that came out of No Child Left Behind. Are those examples of what you're talking about that teachers really probably had very little input in?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, there was a study that came out shortly after NCLB came out. It was interviewing teachers like, are you highly qualified? And teachers like, I have no idea. Like, what does it even mean? Right? I have this quote in the book from, sometime early 1900s, let's say. And it's Nicholas Murray Butler, and he's complaining about who is a pretty well-known education reformer for that time. And he's talking about all the problems with the schools. And he's like, really, it comes down to the fact that we need to teacher-proof our schools, right? We need to make it so we can't have folks kind of messing it up. And there are other folks at the time who are saying, there maybe something will be lost, right? Maybe there are some great folks who are not going to be able to do their thing, but we need a lot of teachers. And the kind of compromise historically has been, that's a price we're willing to pay.
And I would argue that professionalization, for example, I think John Hanushek at Stanford has found the highly qualified designation from NCLB had zero impact on student achievement.
Yeah. So I'm curious about, you talk about, you compare the professionalization of lawyers and doctors, and I was just thinking about how interesting it is that, and want to hear your thoughts on, attorneys and doctors for years and years were male only and male centered professions. And you do talk about the labor of history of working women in the teaching profession. So can you kind of elaborate on where you see those two worlds colliding?
Yeah, that's great, Casey. I mean, I think that's a huge part of the puzzle. And so you think about what has to change. I think it's confronting this history that you're pointing us to right here, right? So when we are getting the modern teaching profession. So we've got teachers for a super long time, but it's not until we have the rise of municipally supported public school systems in like the mid 1800s that we see public schools that would be familiar to us today, right? We see public school teachers in the way we understand it today. And it's at that moment we have the mass entrance of women into the schools, right? And it's not coincidental. They don't just happen to be there, right? They are specifically recruited because they're seen to be affordable, cheap, right? Because there's a lot of them. Folks are like, well, they're not really doing much else right now, right? There's not a lot of opportunities. And they're seen to be good rule followers. And that's a huge part of this. Our early public schools were really a response to this rising wave of immigration that caused a lot of anxiety for folks. And they're thinking of schools as stand-in homes and teachers as stand-in mothers. So these Victorian notions of how women are docile and maternal and nurturing is very much baked into early ideas of what it meant to be a professional teacher. Right. And so, jump to the future, right? Women can run for our highest office. We can own property, we can vote and all these other things. But we're still working with a structure, right? With an institution that has these premises baked into it, and the same goes for race, right?
Right.
Think about why has inequality been this like intractable problem? Well, because the institutions that we're working with were created at a time when equality was so far from a goal, so far from something that was manifested at that time.
Yeah. So I want to go back a little bit to the system or the cycle, I guess, of blame and reform, just because I feel like we have a really excellent example where like it hyper shifting. So sometime last year when it was like the Red for Ed movement, it felt like there was a lot of public support behind teachers, and everybody's like, yeah, teachers, they do a lot. They really help our kids. Like they're filling so many roles. And, fast forward a year or even less later, and now we're like, well, teachers don't want to go back to work during a global pandemic. Well, they're selfish,
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
and so I, as you're talking about gender, race, inequality. So I guess, are those the things that you would point to for why teachers always come back as the root of the problem? Like, we don't talk about structural changes in schools. We don't talk about, why and the purpose of schools. We go back to teachers. We'll just fix the teachers and everything's fine. Like, what's up with that?
Yeah, I mean, I think they're easy targets, right? I think they're easy targets. It's much easier to blame teachers and try and reform teachers than to make structural change, to talk about, how we might have to shift who has power in our schools, how we have to shift how we test and measure learning and define success and all of that. But yeah, I mean, for sure, there's this historical kind of story that's played out where there's, teachers live their lives on like two sides of the same coin, right? Either teachers are our saviors, right? And we're just talking about how self-sacrificing they are, right? That's where we were, like you were saying last spring, like, take all the money, teachers, just take my kids, whatever you do. But then, this moment I think is so unique because we can see how fast that shifts, right? So the other side of the coin, which is where we are now, which is teachers are the problem, right? They're greedy, they're self-interested. If they don't want to go back to school, it's not because they have legitimate concerns. It's because, they're just in it for themselves. And I think both sides of those coins are deeply deprofessionalizing, right? And do trace back to this sort of larger gendered story, right? Where we don't really look to teachers to have expertise and authority, but we're kind of undermining them, right? That either they're like moms and they're self-sacrificing and giving, or they're greedy.
And I may be opening a can of worms here, and I don't know if you wrote about this or have looked into this at all, but have you looked into like the role of unions at all? Do they play any role in professionalization or deprofessional or just anything? I just wonder if you've studied at all their role kind of in the larger picture of what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's a big part of the book. I'm working on another book now all about unions. So yeah, they're a huge part of the story. And there's no kind of simple, I get asked a lot of times, are unions good or bad, right, for our schools? And it's just not even, it's so much more complicated than that. I think what I would say is that given the way our schools are historically and today, unions are inevitable.
Yeah.
Right? Unions are inevitable byproducts of the public schools we have created. Right. And I think you look at this moment right now in the midst of this pandemic, if we didn't have unions, we'd be missing a really critical voice, right? We see with a lot of these school reopening plans, teachers have not particularly been consulted. And it's only when the union has come in and said, it doesn't seem safe,
right?
That folks have backpedaled. So I think what, this moment is really showing us is that if we didn't have a union, teachers would be in dire straits, right? There are not really other mechanisms for them to assert their voice and have authority in the schools.
Right.
And that's because of the way we structured our schools historically.
So kind of switching gears a little bit. So we have a segment on our show called Dear Betsy, which is kind of love letters to our wonderful Education Secretary, Betsy DeVos. She has not replied to my responses to come on the show, but over the past 4 years, it's been my belief that Betsy, as Education Secretary, has really sought to diminish the importance of public education bureaucracy, the power of the Department of Education overall. So, given that in this role, if we had someone that believed in public education, what kind of change do you think we could see in terms of the professionalization of teachers overall?
Yeah, I think one of the things I see historically and today is that public schools are central to our democracy, right? They are like this key but imperfect institution in our democracy. And so it can't be the zero-sum game, right? We have to accept that our public schools are perfectly functioning and are great, or that they are terrible and we should have, charters and choice and all these things instead, right? And so I think that if we really valued public education, we would really value public school teachers.
Yeah.
Right. And I think, what would that look like? Well, I think that we have to think about the way we distribute authority in our schools. So, I think with reopening plans and lots of other examples, what we see are bureaucratic solutions to pedagogical problems.
Yeah.
I think that's backwards, right? And so what if we reoriented that, right? What if we turned to teachers, we deferred to teachers to lead us in conversations about what school reform looked like, and then turn to all the other folks around in the educational complex to make it happen, right? But right now, we're in an industry, really. Our public education is becoming so privatized in so many ways, from, the curricula we use to the tests these high-stake tests that shape what teaching looks like. that is invested, right? We have these industries that are invested in the idea that teachers can't do the work on their own. Teachers can't possibly design curricula in a trustworthy way. Teachers can't possibly define what, to assess what kids need to learn. It's that premise that has made space for these industries.
Yeah. So I want to get you out of here on one last question, along with what you were talking about.
Well, I have a quiz for. I have a quiz for
it too. Quiz. Sorry. All right. Even better. Maybe I won't ask my question, but
the answer is pizza. The answer is always pizza.
Well, we're good. So you talked about policy. And the role of teacher voice in policy. So, I think it's policymakers and educators, sort of like, practitioners in the classroom. I think there can at times be a pretty large gap between the two. And I don't know how much of a role that teachers have in influencing policymakers. I know we, through unions and other larger scale organizations where it's like a collective voice. But to what extent do you see that as a potential solution for, elevating the profession or to getting more is that the solution that teachers need to be more involved in policy? Or do you think it's more, as you just mentioned, like at the local school level where any changes or trust just needs to start to happen?
I think it's both of those things. I think that we have our public schools are local institutions, right? That's how they were designed from the start. But increasingly, you'd have no idea of that, right? It's it's these larger conversations that are happening, even at the national level and in private corporations and think tanks. And it's folks who are not teachers who are leading those conversations. So I think it's both of those things. I think we need to defer to teachers at the local level. And then I think at those upper levels where decisions are increasingly being made, I think we need to be pulling teachers into those, right? Educators into those positions to lead those conversations.
I like it how the private sector about every decade or decade and a half weighs in to tell public education what we're not doing and should be doing. And then teachers have to conform. All right, quiz time. There's a fly fishing question.
That's very good. So, Diana, it's been a pleasure having you on the pod and joining us all the way from North Dakota. We know you are an expert in education history, as well as the most famous North Dakotan that we've had on the pod, but we would like to quiz you on what you know about North Dakota's border rival, South Dakota. Answer 3 quirky questions about the Mount Rushmore state, and you win a prize that is not really determinative.
Okay, you know that I've only lived here for a year, and I'm from the Bronx. But
so you're going to do just as well.
You got a lot to live up to then. This is your true test.
All right, number 1. Spearfish Creek, located just north of Deadwood in Spearfish Canyon, where fly fishing is all the rage, is speedy quick. But what is not normal about Spearfish Creek? Is it A, it freezes from the bottom up, B, fly fishing is illegal in Spearfish Creek, or C, Dr. Dodd doesn't want to fish in Spearfish Creek?
Wow. I think it's an even toss-up in all 3 of those. I'm going to let's go for B.
It's actually, it freezes from the bottom up. A. Oh, no. It also holds the world record for having the greatest change in temperature in the shortest amount of time. At one point, the temperature went from -4 to 45 degrees within 2 minutes. Woo! A little piece of fun fact for you, useless information that I'm full of. Number 2, you still have 2 chances. South Dakota has more shoreline than which state? A, Delaware, B, Florida, or C, Maine?
South Dakota has more shoreline?
Uh-huh.
What are we thinking of the shoreline? Okay, what is the little...
Like lakes and stuff.
Okay, what are the choices again? We've got Maine.
Delaware, Florida, or Maine?
Delaware. Let's go for Delaware. We're just Maine. What are we?
It's actually Florida. We think of winding rivers with crystal clear water and glacial lakes fill the South Dakota landscape, which means they actually have more miles of shoreline than Sunshine State.
It seems a little dubious to me.
I'm gonna have to take a trip.
I just go with what I find on Google. It's no worries. Number 3, Clark, the last one. Clark, South Dakota is home to the which world famous type of wrestling contest? Is it A, Jello wrestling contest, a B, mashed potato wrestling contest, or C, a tree stump wrestling contest?
Oh gosh, I was gonna, I was so sure B, because that feels very wholesome somehow, but I could believe C too. Let's go for B. I'm just gonna stick
B
with
is correct. Debuting in 1999, the contest is modeled on a similar event in Maine and matches teams of 2 in a wrestling ring fashioned out of hay bales, tarps, and filled with mashed potatoes.
Well, if anybody gives you a hard time, just be like, it was about South Dakota.
That's right.
Why would I know that? It's ridiculous.
Just a little fun to end our time together. That's all.
All right, Diana, thank you for coming on the show. Dr. Diana D'Amico Polowitz. Diana, where can, tell us what you're working on and where can people find your work or anything else of note that you'd like to get out there to our listeners?
Cool. Yeah. Well, so the book is widely available. So find your favorite independent bookseller, or if Amazon is your thing, I suppose you could do that too. And the next book that I'm wrapping up right now actually is an edited volume on teachers unions. It's called Walkout: Teacher Activism, Teacher Militancy, Activism, and School Reform. So it brings together a bunch of pretty amazing scholars and who are all taking a different look at how are unions functioning today, right? What role are they playing in our schools? So that should be out in a few months, actually.
Awesome.
Twitter handle, yes or no?
Yep. Twitter handle. What is it? At Dia D'Amico, DIADAMICO.
Correct.
Very nice. All right, Diana. Well, it's been awesome to have you on Ed's Not Dead. You've been a great guest. We'll get you back on the show sometime. Thanks for coming on. We'll see you.
Thanks for having me. Stay well.
Thank you.
All right, you too. Welcome back to Ed's Not Dead. I'm Robbie Dodd. I'm still joined by my co-hosts, Peter and Casey.
Yep.
As always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Pulp Education, a full-service educational media company specializing in leadership instruction and 21st century school reform. Thanks again to Dr. Diana D'Amico Polowitz. She was awesome, wasn't she, fellas?
It was awesome. It's great having her on.
Yep. We got to get her back on when her book on unions comes out.
Yeah.
That'll be good.
Peter, you actually read my mind when you asked that unions question.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I was thinking the same thing.
Yeah. No, it just seemed like, I wonder how they fit into all of it from what she's studied.
All right. It is that time of the show. We are bringing back, this is the 4th time I've mentioned it, not the Robbie segment. So I'm a little hurt by it, but it is that time. Dear Betsy.
Cue the music. So I want to hear what you all think about this. I mean, this is an interesting article that I found. So Betsy DeVos, our wonderful education secretary, who hopefully will not have a job in a few months. The title is, "It's Not My Job to Track School Reopening Plans." So let me ask you both. We have all these schools that are coming back online, fully online or fully in person or hybrid in terms of some students are coming back to school and some are online. DeVos says that it's not her responsibility or the federal government to track reopening plans. What are your thoughts on in a normal functioning administration, like what the department could be doing to really not only track but also support districts in how they are reopening?
Well, I mean, it's not. I mean, because any state governments that are run by Republicans, it's not their job to track health data on COVID. So how could it be the federal Department of Education's job?
Let me rephrase that. So
I was being cynical. What should they be doing? I would say, I know this is a little bit of a slippery slope. I mean, I could see the Fed expecting schools or systems that are reopening to provide some kind of a plan that aligns with standards that are given to states that they have to follow. Right. I'm not sure that the the Department of Education should review every reopening plan.
Right.
But I think there's a role to play on policy and some level of accountability.
Right.
I would hope, plans like that might have stopped us from getting to where we are right now.
Right.
I wouldn't want to see plans that were onerous for local school systems and that created a lot of bureaucratic kinds of, misunderstandings or hoops to jump through. But let's just start with some basic expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think education, as we've talked about, is essentially a state by state issue. And every state does it a little bit differently, has a little bit different standards, et cetera, et cetera. But if tracking state and or school district, to be honest, I don't know enough about exactly the level of information that the Department of Education collects. If that's not their job, then what is their job?
what are they doing?
What is their point? You know what I mean? And I agree with you, Robbie, that it's not to collect the data to then be like, this new rule, this law, I guess that could be something that comes out of it. But they are the aggregator of national data. The big thing they're missing here is a national database of COVID cases where schools are being impacted. We talked about this last episode. Part of the problem with schools and school districts being hesitant to open is because there's no data. Not no data, but there's limited data on the extent to which schools are sort of super spreaders or not super spreaders, as the case may be, because the approach has been, well, stick your head in the sand and pretend like this doesn't matter, pretend like it doesn't exist.
Right.
And if you just think that it doesn't exist, it won't. And that is really where I think I have the biggest issue in the flaw in their approach is just pretending that this is not there. So yeah, don't go in and start, like micromanaging, but at the same time, it's like you can collect data so that we can make informed scientific decisions off of it.
Yeah. Well, an executive would say to his cabinet officials, for example, you're sitting at the table, or her cabinet officials, you would say, okay, Miss DHS person, Department of Education person, right? Health and Human Services, Department of Education, work together to have expectations for states about health metrics and education. Mm-hmm. Pretty basic.
Right.
There's been no coordination at the federal level on, let alone the health of our citizens. So, all that seems to me to be pretty basic governance and leadership.
Right. And I'll give you an example. The CARES Act Education Stabilization Fund that was signed into law in March provided $30.75 billion available for COVID-19 related purposes. $14 billion for higher education emergency relief fund, $13.5 billion for elementary and secondary schools emergency relief fund, and $3 billion for governor's emergency education relief fund. So for an example, for Ohio as a state, I'll give you an example. Ohio got $489 million for their elementary and secondary schools emergency relief fund. Now that's an exorbitant amount of money that could be even more targeted if there was some sort of, like you're saying, foundational guidance coming from the Department of Education.
Well, and the CARES Act has trickled down to some specific guidance at the local school level. Mm-hmm. There are CARES Act programs that are being implemented in school systems that are mandated by the state. Interventions to make up for learning loss that have to follow certain criteria. But again, with our friend Betsy, I just think it's so hysterical how, help me out here. Anything that conflicts with freedom, she doesn't, the the department has no oversight of this, and yet the Department of Ed is going to point out the massive failings of public education. So, I mean,
there's a reason why she's had her job for 4 years.
And this is also the Republican paradox, right?
Yeah.
They believe in less governance, generally, in more free market capitalism. So when the Republicans are elected to federal agencies, their interpretation of doing a good job is doing nothing. Right.
Yeah.
Right. And guess how many of the how many new voices will come out of the woodwork in January if Joe Biden wins? How many of our fiscal conservative friends will suddenly become fiscally conservative again?
Can't afford it.
We can't afford it. We can't have another stimulus. Nope.
All right. That was a good one, Mr. Siddons.
Short and sweet. Thank you for indulging me on returning.
But let me ask this.
Sure.
This is we've almost let a moment go by. Today is the 20th of October, folks. By the time we record another episode, there may never be another Dear Betsy episode.
Oh no!
Good Lord, that is.
I didn't think about that.
But bittersweet.
We did say we were going to do a massive Dear Betsy retrospective at some point, right?
Oh, we have to. I mean, we need Crable to do some pretty awesome editing with some sound clips like he did last time.
All right, we'll do a top 10.
Dear John
we'll do
King.
Yeah, we'll do a top 10 Dear Betsy segment at some point. All right, quiz.
All right, you ready?
Yeah.
So, Dr. Dodd, can you remind us what the score was last time?
I think Crable got shut out.
He got
one. No, he got one.
No, I think he shut out.
0. Yeah, I didn't get a
Oh, he
single
did?
one.
Okay.
All right, so Mr. Crable, you're going to go first this time since you lost
thank you.
abysmally
Thank
last time. So 3 questions each, and are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so this is a potpourri of questions, if you will, under
All
different
right.
topics. Number 1, animal rescuers in California made an early morning visit to a bank to chase away an unusual pair of masked bandits. What did they find? Did they find A, 2 raccoons, B, 2 deer, or C, 2 beavers?
2 raccoons.
That is correct. 2 raccoons. There were muddy paw prints on a tree outside the bank, so we suspect the raccoons climbed the tree to the roof of the bank and somehow managed to crawl into the air ducts and fell through the ceiling tiles onto the floor of the bank.
I appreciate the easy question to start. Thank you.
Number 2, a U.S. company is offering fans of breakfast a mask that does what? Does it A, smell like coffee, B, smells like bacon, or C, smells like pancakes?
Bacon is the craze, man.
That is correct. Smells like bacon. Hormel said the Black Label breathable bacon mask uses the latest in bacon smell technology to give the wearer the experience of smelling bacon anytime they don the COVID-19 protection accessory. And number 3, this is not a multiple choice question because clearly I didn't come up with. Sorry.
Choices?
Yeah. Let's see here. All right, ready?
That's good radio right there.
I got it. Sorry, you can edit that out. Number 3. Number 3. What was dumped into a lake in Prospect Park in New York City? A bag of snake heads. B, 2 bags of eels. Or C, 2 bags of zebra mussels.
I will go with A.
Actually,
I should have taken C.
Actually, no, it was B, 2 bags of eels, bizarrely released in Brooklyn's Prospect Park Lake, could potentially cause big problems for native species. Not really sure why it happened, and people aren't really sure what to do about it. So, well, Mr. Crable,
so I guess
2 out of 3,
question
buddy.
I guess the question is, so were they alive?
Yes, they were alive. Someone found them and started pulling one of the bags away, and they just scurried into the water.
Oh man.
Yeah. And they're
Have
not going
either
to be able to get them out either.
Have either one of you ever caught an eel?
I have not, but I imagine
I've
it's hard.
seen many moray eels, but while diving or swimming.
Yeah, catching an eel on a fishing rod is one of the kind of scarier things,
How many have you caught?
especially when they're big. I watched my brother pull a massive eel out of a creek right near the beach in Bethany, Delaware.
Ooh.
I was probably about 8, and I was completely freaked out by the whole thing. Wow. It was huge.
Well, they smack you with their tail.
Yeah, they're just big and slimy and thick and
eelish.
Eelish. You don't expect when you're crabbing or fishing that you're going to pull out like a 3-foot eel.
All right, RD, you ready? You have to beat 2 out of 3. Number 1, a Brazilian senator was caught hiding cash where? A, in his freezer, B, in the vents of his house, or C, between his butt cheeks.
See, Crable didn't get a question like this. He got a raccoon question. I'm just going to throw caution to the wind on this quiz. I'm going to say the butt cheeks.
That is correct. Between his butt cheeks, being investigated for fraud, apparently. Very good. Number 2, in California, Carmen and Travis Long's Pirates of the Caribbean Halloween display is so realistic that people keep calling 911 to report what? A, that there's a fire. B, that a Johnny Depp impersonator is actually walking by the display heckling the neighbors. Or C, that the only thing it says on repeat is "Where has all the rum gone?" on a loudspeaker.
I'm gonna go with Captain Jack Sparrow, Johnny Depp. B.
Actually, it's A, that there's a fire. The display includes a fake house fire in California. Firefighters who responded to the Riverside residents were so impressed with the faux blaze that they high-fived Travis and told him, "Great job." Of California, of all places, fake fires. Number 3, all right, Dr. D, this is big time. A town in Quebec has finally changed its toxic name. What's the now defunct name of this town? Is it A, asbestos, B, arsenic, or C, mercury?
I thought you were going to say redskin. Arsenic. Hold on. No. What are they? Give me the 3 choices again.
The choices are asbestos, arsenic, or mercury.
I'm going to go with. I want to go A or B. I'm going to go with. I'm going to go with B.
The answer is A, asbestos. Ooh. And the town will now be called Val de Sources. After a vote of nearly 52% of the voting population above age 14, the city initially grew from the development of an asbestos mine around a large deposit of the substance discovered there in 1897. And the town thrived on asbestos mining and product manufacturing. The original, this is a fun fact here for you, the original list of name choices had to be scrapped due to controversial choices, one of which was Apalone, Apalone, which is in honor of an indigenous species of turtle, which was suggested by Greenpeace in Canada. You'd appreciate this, Robbie, with one person writing, quote, "I wouldn't be proud to say that I live in a soft turtle city." So there you go.
I was thinking about mining, and I should have gone with asbestos. I'm pretty sure that arsenic does not come from mines.
It's hard to find the non-answers. I'll tell you that.
Yeah, that was a tough one. All right, that was a good quiz. Crable beat me 2-1.
You got it.
That's right. So, but you're still up, I think, in points overall.
All right. Well, there's always the next quiz.
Thank you again for indulging me.
Dr. D'Amico Polowitz did not do all that well in her quiz.
Well, she's a new resident to the Dakotans, you know.
Yeah, you could have hit her with a. She's from the Bronx. You could have hit her with a New York quiz.
Oh, well, I should have, but I was also going to put in something about a little dig about why do we have 2 Dakotas, but I didn't know how long she's actually lived there and how much connection she has to the place. So I didn't want to offend either the North or South Dakotans.
Got it. We didn't get any show feedback about our Eddie VH tribute from the first episode.
No, we did not.
Yeah, no, I didn't hear anything.
Man, I thought that was pretty sweet.
Mm-hmm.
Did you watch Bill Burr's tribute at the end of SNL?
No, I need to see that.
You need to watch it. It's one of the best SNL episodes in a very long time.
Was it this past Saturday night?
No, it was the Saturday prior.
Was that the first? Was that the season opener?
Yeah, second episode.
All right, the cold open.
There's one sketch real at the end of Bill Burr where it's like a Sam Adams commercial, fluke, fake commercial, and it's one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life.
I have found the cold opens to be rather lame.
I love the cold opens. That's my favorite part.
I know. I usually love them, but what's her name that's playing?
Jim Carrey as Joe Biden. It makes my life. I
don't think there's enough substance there.
Because it's a boring race.
I know. I mean, but
it's a boring race. Trump is the same person he was in 2016.
He's so funny, though.
He's such a moron.
No, not Trump. Alec Baldwin.
Oh, Alec Baldwin is so good.
He's hysterical.
Yeah.
Tracy Casey thought I said that Trump was so funny.
It's hilarious.
It's so hilarious. I was like, I thought we were beyond that. Like maybe January 2017. Yeah, he's funny. Maybe.
All right. As always, you can find us on Twitter at Ed's Not Dead PC. I don't really follow us on Twitter, so I don't even know what you're posting, you guys.
Oh, all good stuff.
Radical.
So
good. Radical stuff out there.
Maybe next episode we can at least end on our fantasy football teams and update everybody on them because I want to share about mine.
All right, and check out Casey's blog, Equity Sticks Are Not the Answer, on edsnotdead.com. It's very popular. As always, Ed's Not Dead is brought to you by Pulp Education. Thank you to Pulp Education. I'm not going to read the rest of the ad. All right, fellas, what do you got coming up?
What's coming up? I'm making tunes, man. I'm just making number one hits over here.
Oh, great. Well, I got to listen to your song. I haven't listened yet. I have to admit.
Yeah, go on Spotify, YouTube, Soul Witness. It's called What You Say.
It's good. Yeah, I put it in my school's videos.
Nice, man. Yep.
I will listen tonight. So you're just making tunes. You're like Steve Winwood over there that basically played every instrument on Ark of the Diver.
Yeah, a lot less talent, but other than that, very similar. Yes.
No, I think you're today's Steve Winwood. Stevie Winwood's good. You like Traffic, Mr. Krabs?
Yeah, for sure.
The low spark of High Heeled Boys. The greatest albums ever made.
The greatest name for any song ever, really.
Oh, it's amazing. Yeah. It's a great album.
Yeah, great album. All right, Mr. Siddons, what do you got going on? How's Frida? Do you want to share with the listeners the big news on Frida?
Oh, well, she started walking, so that's the big news. And it's
exciting.
And it's not a fluke. It's like she's ready to rock.
Yeah.
Opens a whole new can of worms in
parenting. So funny. She's really funny.
The easy
getting a little personality. It's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Not long after the walking, the nose starts. So you got the two happening at the same time. No, and I'm gonna not stop moving. All right, I am going salmon fishing in upstate New York in 2 weeks. So don't try to find me in the first week of November.
Are you voting up in Canada, or did you send in your vote already?
No, but I will be in the jaws of the beast up where I'm going fishing.
What does that mean?
I mean that it is Trump country where I'm going.
Oh, but you'll be up there for the election, like during the election?
I will be driving there the day after the election.
Ooh, that's Frida's birthday.
There you go. All right.
Do you bring the salmon home to eat, or is you all catch and release?
We are going to bring a cooler this time. We have not brought any of the salmon home to eat. The Kings are running out of Lake Ontario, and if you get them fresh, you can definitely bring them home. It's the timing is going to matter. Once you get into November, they start to become what they call zombie fish. where their skin starts to peel off and they turn white, and you wouldn't want to eat them.
So while you're fishing for salmon,
so gross, right?
Will you be reading the Satanic Verses?
I'm a little
Salman Rushdie. Or is that different? Is that different?
That's different. All right. On that Jim Siddons joke.
That actually is literally a Jim Siddons joke.
we are going to sign off. Thanks as always for joining Ed's Not Dead. Spread the word about the pod. We appreciate you listening. And thanks again to Dr. Diana Demika-Polovich. She was a great guest. Send us some show feedback. We will read it on the air. Boys, it's good to see you. And we'll talk to our listeners in a couple weeks. Thanks for tuning in. Say bye.
Bye.